A hotel concierge laughed at my room complaint, not knowing I was the travel critic who'd made their resort famous. 30 minutes later, the general manager rushed to the lobby. That was the moment she realized she'd just destroyed her entire career. The laugh wasn't subtle. It was that particular kind of snort, half amusement, half contempt, that people reserve for those they consider beneath them. Vanessa Thornton, senior concierge at the Meridian Grand Resort and Spa, leaned back in her chair behind that gleaming marble desk and let out a sound that echoed across the lobby like a slap. She didn't even try to hide it. Her perfectly manicured hand came up to cover her mouth, but her eyes, cold and dismissive, told me everything I needed to know. She thought I was nobody. She thought my complaint about the mold growing in my bathroom, the broken air conditioning unit that had turned my suite into a sauna, and the used bandage I'd found stuck to the underside of my nightstand was hilarious. She thought I was just another guest she could brush off with a rehearsed apology and a promise that maintenance would look into it tomorrow. What she didn't know was that my review had put this resort on the map 3 years ago. What she didn't know was that I'd spent the last decade building a reputation that could make or break luxury properties across 4 continents. What she didn't know was that everything she'd just said and done had been recorded by the pen camera clipped to my shirt pocket, standard equipment for any serious travel critic doing an undercover reassessment. My name is Jonathan Reeves, and for the past 12 years, I've been the lead travel critic for Wanderlust Elite, the most influential luxury travel publication in the industry. Our subscriber base includes Fortune 500 executives, A-list celebrities, and heads of state who rely on our reviews to determine where they spend their vacation budgets. A 5-star rating from Wanderlust Elite can triple a resort's bookings overnight. A 2-star rating can send them into bankruptcy within 18 months. I don't say this to brag. I say this because context matters. The Meridian Grand Resort and Spa, nestled on the coast of Southern California overlooking the Pacific Ocean, had been a struggling 3-star property when I first visited in 2022. The previous owners had invested millions in renovations, but couldn't figure out why guests weren't coming. I'd given them a glowing review after experiencing genuinely exceptional service, innovative cuisine, and attention to detail that rivaled properties charging twice as much. Within 6 months, they'd achieved the impossible, a complete turnaround that became a case study in hospitality management programs at Cornell and UNLV. The new ownership group that purchased the property in 2024 had paid a premium specifically because of that review. They'd framed a copy of my article and hung it in their corporate headquarters. They'd used quotes from it in their marketing materials. They'd built their entire brand identity around the reputation I'd helped create. 3 years later, I'd received enough complaints from readers to warrant a reassessment. Anonymous tips about declining service standards, reports of overcharging for amenities that had previously been complimentary, photographs of maintenance issues that shouldn't exist in a property charging $800 a night. My editor, Rebecca Langston, had called me into her office in Manhattan 2 weeks ago with a thick folder of complaints. She'd dropped it on her desk and looked at me with that expression she reserves for situations that require delicate handling. "Jonathan," she'd said, "you made these people. Now I need you to unmake them if necessary." I understood what she meant. A critic's reputation depends on accuracy. If I'd praised a property that had subsequently deteriorated, my credibility was on the line. I needed to see for myself whether the Meridian Grand had maintained the standards that earned my original endorsement, or whether they'd coasted on reputation while letting quality slide. I'd booked a suite under a pseudonym, David Fisher, using a credit card and identification documents that Wanderlust Elite maintained specifically for undercover assessments. The reservation was for 5 nights, enough time to thoroughly evaluate every aspect of the guest experience. I'd arrived on a Wednesday afternoon, requested a standard check-in process, and immediately started documenting everything. The first red flags appeared within hours of my arrival. The bellhop who brought my luggage to the room was clearly undertrained, struggling with the electronic key card and unable to answer basic questions about the property's amenities. The suite itself, the same ocean view premium category I'd praised so effusively 3 years ago, showed obvious signs of deferred maintenance. Paint was peeling near the bathroom ceiling. The carpet had visible stains that no amount of cleaning could remove. The minibar refrigerator hummed with a grinding noise that made sleep difficult. These were cosmetic issues, concerning but not damning. What I found on the second day crossed a line. I'd requested fresh towels that morning and received them promptly, but when I went to use one after my shower, I noticed a dark stain that looked disturbingly like dried blood near the hem. I photographed it immediately, marking the timestamp and location in my notes. That afternoon, I discovered the bandage, a used adhesive bandage with what appeared to be a small amount of dried blood on the pad, stuck to the underside of my nightstand. Someone had apparently cut themselves, applied a bandage, removed it later, and stuck it to the furniture rather than disposing of it properly. The cleaning staff had missed it entirely. I photographed this as well, using a macro lens to capture the detail. These weren't just maintenance issues anymore. These were health and safety violations that could expose guests to bloodborne pathogens. By Thursday morning, the situation had deteriorated further. The air conditioning unit in my suite had stopped working entirely around 2 a.m, turning the room into a humid trap that made sleep impossible. I'd called the front desk and been told that maintenance would address it first thing in the morning. By 11, no one had come. I'd called again and been told they were experiencing high volume and would get to me as soon as possible. By 2 in the afternoon, the temperature in my room had climbed to what I estimated was over 85 degrees. I could feel sweat beading on my forehead just sitting still. I'd had enough. I gathered my documentation, my photographs, my time-stamped notes, and headed down to the lobby to speak with management directly. The Meridian Grand's lobby was designed to impress: soaring ceilings with exposed beams, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking manicured gardens that led to the ocean, artisan furniture that cost more than most people's cars. The concierge desk sat prominently near the entrance, a curved marble structure with brass accents that gleamed under carefully positioned lighting. Behind it sat Vanessa Thornton. I'd noticed her name tag when I checked in, and I'd already observed her interacting with other guests. She had a particular way of assessing people as they approached, a quick scan of their clothing, their luggage, their general demeanor that determined how much effort she'd invest in helping them. I approached the desk wearing khaki shorts, a plain navy polo shirt, and sandals, standard vacation attire that revealed nothing about my profession or purpose. My hair was slightly disheveled from the heat in my room. I probably looked frustrated and tired, which I was. Vanessa's eyes swept over me in that practiced assessment, and I watched her expression shift almost imperceptibly. Whatever calculation she'd made, I hadn't passed. Her smile dimmed by perhaps 15%, becoming more perfunctory, less genuine. "May I help you, sir?" she asked, the word sir carrying just a hint of condescension, as if she were doing me a favor by acknowledging my existence. I explained my situation calmly and professionally. The air conditioning in room 412 had been broken since early morning. I'd called twice with no response. The temperature was now unbearable, and I needed someone to either fix it immediately or move me to a different room. I didn't mention the blood-stained towel or the used bandage. I wanted to see how she handled a straightforward maintenance request before escalating. Her response was a masterclass in dismissive hospitality. She didn't apologize. She didn't express concern. She typed something on her computer, glanced at her screen, and informed me that maintenance was backed up due to several urgent issues and that my request had been logged and would be addressed within the next 24 to 48 hours. 24 to 48 hours, I repeated, making sure I'd heard correctly. My room is currently over 85 degrees. You're telling me I should just wait 2 days for someone to look at it? She shrugged, an actual shrug, and said that they were doing the best they could with limited resources. Her tone suggested that my comfort was not a priority, that I should be grateful for whatever attention they deigned to provide. I felt my jaw tighten, but kept my voice level. I asked if there were any other rooms available that I could move to while waiting for the repair. She glanced at her screen again, though I could tell she wasn't really checking. "We're fully booked," she said. "There's nothing I can do." This was when I made my mistake, though it wasn't really a mistake so much as an underestimation of how far she was willing to go. I mentioned that I'd also found some concerning hygiene issues in my room, that I wanted to speak with a manager about potentially adjusting my bill to reflect the compromised experience. Her eyebrows rose. "Hygiene issues," she repeated, as if I'd claimed to find a unicorn in my bathtub. I described the blood-stained towel and the used bandage without showing my photographs. I kept my tone factual, not accusatory, giving her every opportunity to respond appropriately, to express concern, to offer to investigate, to demonstrate even a modicum of the customer service that had once made this property exceptional. Instead, she laughed. That's when it happened, that snorting, contemptuous laugh that would cost her everything. She actually laughed in my face and said, "Sir, our housekeeping standards are impeccable. I don't know what you think you saw, but I can assure you that we do not have used bandages or blood-stained towels in our guest rooms. Perhaps you should check your own luggage before making accusations." The lobby had gone quiet. A couple checking in at the front desk had turned to watch. A family walking toward the pool stopped mid-stride. An elderly woman sitting in one of the lobby's armchairs lowered her magazine and stared. Everyone had heard her, heard the accusation that I'd somehow planted the evidence I was complaining about, heard the dismissive tone that suggested I was either lying or delusional. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't rise. I'd been doing this job for 12 years, and I'd learned that the worst thing you can do in these situations is react emotionally. Emotion clouds documentation. Emotion makes you seem unreliable. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a business card. Not my real one, but one I carry for exactly these situations, plain white with only a phone number on it. I placed it on the marble counter between us. "Please have your general manager call me within the hour," I said. "We need to discuss how this property handles guest complaints." Vanessa picked up the card, glanced at it, and actually smirked. "Sir, our general manager doesn't take meetings with every guest who has a minor inconvenience. I'm sure whatever concerns you have can be addressed through our standard feedback process. You can fill out a comment card at checkout." I nodded slowly, maintaining eye contact. "I understand. Could you tell me your full name for my records?" She hesitated for the first time, something flickering behind her eyes, but then straightened with what looked like renewed confidence. "Vanessa Thornton, senior concierge. I've worked here for 6 years, and I can assure you that your complaint will be handled appropriately. Thank you for your patience." She turned away, dismissing me, and began typing on her computer. I didn't move. I stood at that marble counter for another 30 seconds, watching her pretend I didn't exist, watching other guests process what they'd witnessed. watching the security camera in the corner record everything. Then I walked to a quiet corner of the lobby, sat in one of the artisan chairs that cost more than my first car, and made a phone call. Not to my editor. Not to corporate. I called Michael Brennan, the Meridian Grand's general manager. I had his direct number because he'd given it to me personally 3 years ago, after my review published, after his property's bookings tripled, after he'd sent me a bottle of champagne with a handwritten note thanking me for changing his life. Michael answered on the second ring. Brennan here. Michael, this is Jonathan Reeves from Wanderlust Elite. The silence that followed lasted approximately 4 seconds, but it felt much longer. Jonathan, he finally said, and I could hear his voice shift from professional to personal. My God, how are you? It's been too long. How can I help? I need you to come to your lobby immediately, I said. I'm conducting an undercover reassessment of your property, and I've just had an experience with your senior concierge that you need to see for yourself. The phone clicked. No goodbye, no questions, no hesitation. I counted in my head, wondering how long it would take him to get from wherever his office was located to the lobby. I'd estimated about 3 minutes, maybe 4 if he stopped to compose himself. I was wrong. Michael Brennan burst through a service door behind the front desk, exactly 93 seconds after I'd hung up. He was a tall man in his early 50s, silver hair kept short, the kind of perpetually trim physique that comes from regular tennis matches and portion control. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost $3,000, and his face, normally composed and professional, had gone completely white. His eyes swept the lobby, found me sitting in the corner, and then found Vanessa, still behind her marble desk, still typing, completely unaware that her world was about to collapse. Michael didn't go to her immediately. He came to me first, crossing the lobby in long strides that drew attention from everyone watching. He stopped in front of my chair and extended his hand, and when I stood to shake it, I could feel him trembling. Jonathan, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I had no idea you were here. Please tell me what happened. I gave him the summary. The broken air conditioning, the blood-stained towel, the used bandage, the multiple unanswered calls, the dismissive response from his senior concierge, the laugh, the accusation that I'd planted the evidence myself, the suggestion that I fill out a comment card at checkout. Michael's face cycled through several emotions as I spoke: disbelief, horror, rage, and finally something that looked like grief. By the time I finished, he looked like a man watching his house burn down with everything he owned inside. I need to see it, he said. The room, the evidence, everything. Of course, I said. But first, I think you should have a conversation with Ms. Thornton. He closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them, they'd hardened into something professional and cold. Yes, I think I should. What followed was the most uncomfortable 30 seconds I've ever witnessed in my career. Michael walked to the concierge desk with measured steps, each footfall deliberate, his posture rigid with barely contained fury. Vanessa looked up as he approached, her expression shifting from boredom to mild interest to confusion as she registered the look on his face. Michael, she said, is everything all right? He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned to look at me, still standing by my chair across the lobby, and then back at her. He spoke quietly, but in the lobby's acoustic design, his voice carried perfectly to everyone present. Ms. Thornton, do you know who that man is? The man you just laughed at? The man you accused of planting evidence? The man you told to fill out a comment card? Vanessa's confident expression flickered. She glanced at me, then back at Michael, her mind clearly racing to figure out what she'd missed. I don't, she started to say. That man, Michael interrupted, is Jonathan Reeves. The Jonathan Reeves, the travel critic whose review saved this property from bankruptcy. The man whose recommendation brought in $40 million in bookings over 3 years. The man who has the power to destroy us with a single article. And you just laughed in his face and accused him of lying about hygiene violations in his room. The color drained from Vanessa's face so quickly, I thought she might faint. Her mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. She gripped the edge of her marble desk with both hands, her knuckles going white, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the stone. Michael, she finally managed. He was dressed like, he didn't say who he was. I just thought he was. She couldn't finish the sentence. She couldn't admit out loud what we all knew she was thinking. Michael's voice dropped even lower, but somehow became more cutting. You thought he was what, Vanessa? Someone who didn't matter? Someone whose complaints weren't worth your time? Someone you could dismiss and humiliate because he wasn't wearing expensive enough clothes? Is that how we treat guests at the Meridian Grand now? Is that the standard of service I should expect from my senior concierge? The lobby had gone completely silent. The couple at the front desk had abandoned their check-in process. The family heading to the pool had stopped completely, their children forgotten as they watched the drama unfold. Even the staff had frozen, front desk clerks and bellhops, and the bartender from the adjacent lounge all staring at the scene unfolding before them. Vanessa's facade cracked completely. Her eyes filled with tears, not of remorse, I suspected, but of fear. She'd finally understood what she'd done. She'd finally grasped that her career in hospitality was ending, right here, right now, in front of witnesses. "Michael, please," she whispered. "I've worked here for 6 years. I didn't mean to. Please just let me explain." Michael shook his head slowly. "Go to my office. Wait there. Don't speak to anyone. We'll discuss your future employment after I've dealt with this situation." The word future hung in the air like a death sentence, because everyone present knew there wasn't going to be one. Vanessa walked out from behind her desk on shaking legs, moving like someone in a dream or a nightmare. She passed within 3 feet of me on her way to the back offices, and for just a moment, our eyes met. I expected to see hatred there, or blame, or defiance. Instead, I saw something I hadn't anticipated. Recognition. Not of who I was, but of what she'd become. In that moment, she saw herself clearly, perhaps for the first time in years. She saw the person she'd turned into, someone who judged guests by their clothing and dismissed complaints as inconveniences. Someone who'd lost sight of why she'd entered the hospitality industry in the first place. Someone who'd let cynicism and exhaustion transform her into exactly the kind of person she probably would have despised a decade ago. Then she was gone, disappeared through a service door, and Michael was walking toward me with his hand extended again. "Jonathan, please, let me see the room. Let me understand the full scope of what we're dealing with. I need to know everything." The elevator ride to the 4th floor was silent. Michael stood with his hands clasped behind his back, staring at the numbers climbing on the display, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles working beneath his skin. When the doors opened, he followed me down the hallway to room 412, and I used my keycard to let us in. The heat hit us like a wall. The room had climbed to what I estimated was now over 90 degrees, the air thick and stagnant, smelling faintly of mold and something else I couldn't identify. Michael stopped 2 steps inside the door, his eyes moving across the space, cataloging everything, the peeling paint, the stained carpet, the grinding refrigerator, the general sense of neglect that permeated every surface. "My God," he whispered. "How did we let it get this bad?" I showed him the photographs on my phone first, the timeline of documentation I'd created over the past 2 days, the blood-stained towel, now sealed in a plastic bag I'd brought for exactly this purpose, the used bandage still stuck to the underside of the nightstand because I'd wanted him to see it in situ, the maintenance request logs from my calls, time-stamped and recorded on my phone's call history. Michael examined each piece of evidence with the thoroughness of a detective at a crime scene. His face grew progressively more ashen as the scope of the failures became clear. When he saw the bandage, he actually stepped back, his hand coming up to cover his mouth. "This is a health code violation," he said, his voice hollow. "If the county inspector saw this, we'd be shut down. We'd lose our license, everything we've built." I showed him one more piece of evidence, the video from my pen camera, the entire interaction with Vanessa, recorded in high definition with crystal clear audio. Her laugh, her accusations, her dismissive tone, her suggestion that I fill out a comment card. Michael watched the video in silence, his expression unreadable, but I could see his hand shaking by the time it finished. "What do you need from me?" he asked when it was over. "What can I possibly do to make this right?" I'd been thinking about this question since the moment Vanessa laughed at me. In my 12 years as a critic, I'd seen properties recover from bad reviews. I'd seen managers turn around failing operations through genuine commitment to improvement. I'd also seen properties try to buy their way out of accountability, offering comped stays and cash payments in exchange for silence. I wanted to see which category Michael fell into. "I need 3 things," I said. "First, I need complete transparency. Full access to your maintenance logs, your housekeeping protocols, your staff training records, everything. I need to understand whether what I experienced was an isolated incident or a systemic failure. Second, I need accountability. Not just for Miss Thornton, but for whoever allowed this property to deteriorate to this point. I want to know who's responsible and what you're going to do about it. Third, I need time. I'm going to complete my full 5-night assessment, staying in a different room that meets the standards I expect from a property at this price point. And I'm going to write an honest review based on everything I observe." Michael nodded slowly, processing each demand. "The transparency is yours. I'll have our operations director compile everything you need by tomorrow morning. The accountability, that's going to require some difficult conversations with our ownership group, but I'll make sure they understand the severity of the situation." He paused, and I could see him wrestling with something. "What about Ms. Thornton?" I asked. "What happens to her?" His expression hardened. "She's terminated, effective immediately, not just for how she treated you, but for what she represents. If my senior concierge feels comfortable dismissing guest complaints and laughing at people who don't meet her expectations, that's a failure of leadership. My leadership. I let this culture develop on my watch, and she's not the only one who needs to answer for it." There was something genuine in his response, something that gave me hope for the property's future. This wasn't a man trying to save face. This was a man who'd just realized how badly he'd failed and was committed to fixing it. I spent the next 3 days conducting the most thorough property assessment of my career. Michael was true to his word. I received complete access to every system, every record, every corner of the operation. What I found was troubling, but not irredeemable. The deterioration had started about 18 months earlier, after the original ownership group sold to a private equity firm focused on maximizing short-term returns. The new owners had cut the maintenance budget by 40%, reduced housekeeping staff by a third, and eliminated the comprehensive training program that had been the backbone of the property's exceptional service. Michael had pushed back against these changes, I learned from internal documents he shared with me, but he'd been overruled at every turn. The ownership group saw him as an obstacle to profitability, someone too focused on guest experience and not enough on the bottom line. They'd been planning to replace him by the end of the fiscal year with someone more aligned with their cost-cutting philosophy. What they hadn't counted on was me showing up. My visit changed everything. Within 24 hours of my phone call to Michael, the private equity firm's managing partners were on a plane from New York. Within 48 hours, they were sitting across from me in a conference room, sweating through their expensive suits, trying to understand how badly they'd miscalculated. There were three of them: Douglas Fairbanks, the senior partner, a silver-haired man in his 60s with the polished demeanor of someone who'd spent his career making money disappear into favorable quarterly reports. Beside him sat Amanda Rothschild, the firm's hospitality portfolio manager, a sharp-featured woman in her 40s who kept checking her phone as if she had somewhere more important to be. And finally, Howard Blackwell, the junior partner who'd led the Meridian Grand acquisition, a nervous-looking man in his late 30s who seemed to understand better than his colleagues just how much trouble they were in. I didn't enjoy the meeting. Contrary to what some people think, I don't take pleasure in watching businesses squirm. My job is to provide honest assessments that help travelers make informed decisions, not to punish people for their mistakes. But I also wasn't going to soften my findings to make anyone feel better. I laid out everything: the maintenance failures, the housekeeping violations, the staffing cuts that had directly contributed to declining service standards, and the cultural rot that had allowed a senior employee to laugh in a guest's face without fear of consequences. The documented evidence was irrefutable. The pen camera footage of Vanessa's behavior had already been shared with Wanderlust Elite's legal team, and while we had no intention of releasing it publicly without cause, its existence ensured that no one could spin a narrative that contradicted what had actually happened. Douglas Fairbanks tried anyway. "Mr. Reeves," he said in that smooth, practiced voice that probably worked wonders in boardrooms, "I think we can all agree that the incident with Ms. Thornton was unfortunate and not representative of the experience we strive to provide. We're prepared to offer you a substantial settlement to acknowledge any inconvenience you experienced, along with a lifetime membership to our premium guest program." His hand moved toward his briefcase, and I knew he had a number in mind, probably 6 figures, enough to make the problem disappear. I stopped him before he could continue. "Mr. Fairbanks," I said, "let me be very clear about something. I'm not here to negotiate. I'm not interested in settlements or memberships or whatever else you think might influence my assessment. My review will be based solely on what I observed during my stay, and that review will be published in our March issue, regardless of what we discuss today. The only question is whether it will include a section on your response to these failures, and if so, whether that response demonstrates genuine commitment to improvement or a cynical attempt to buy silence." The room went very quiet. Amanda Rothschild finally looked up from her phone, her expression sharpening as she reassessed the situation. Howard Blackwell had gone pale. Only Douglas Fairbanks maintained his composure, though I could see the calculation behind his eyes, the realization that his usual tactics weren't going to work here. "What do you want to see from us?" he finally asked. It was the same question Michael had posed 3 days earlier, but coming from a different place. Michael had asked because he genuinely wanted to make things right. Douglas was asking because he wanted to know the minimum he could offer to protect his investment. The difference was obvious, and it would shape my review. "I want to see meaningful change," I said. "Not promises, not press releases, not cosmetic improvements designed to look good in photographs. I want to see you reverse the staffing cuts and restore the training programs that made this property exceptional. I want to see you empower Michael Brennan to run this resort the way it should be run, without interference from people whose only metric is quarterly returns. And I want to see accountability for the culture that allowed these failures to happen. What happened with Ms. Thornton wasn't an isolated incident. It was the inevitable result of a system that prioritizes cost-cutting over guest experience, that treats employees as expenses to be minimized rather than assets to be developed. You created the conditions for that behavior, and you need to own that." Howard Blackwell cleared his throat. "Mr. Reeves," he said, his voice shaking slightly, "I led this acquisition. I pushed for the budget cuts. I believed we could maintain quality while improving margins, and I was wrong. I take full responsibility for my role in what happened. It was the first genuine statement any of them had made." Douglas shot Howard a look that could have melted steel, but Howard didn't back down. He met my eyes with what looked like genuine remorse. "If you're willing to give us a chance to make this right," he continued, "I'll personally oversee the implementation of whatever changes you recommend. I'll put my own position on the line as a guarantee." That offer carried weight. Private equity partners don't risk their positions lightly. Howard was betting his career on his ability to fix what he'd broken, and that bet told me something important about his character. I spent 2 more days at the property, this time in a properly maintained suite that met the standards I expected. The difference was stark. Fresh paint, working climate control, spotless housekeeping, staff who were attentive without being obsequious. Michael had clearly launched an emergency remediation effort, pulling in extra resources to address the most egregious issues while developing longer-term plans for systemic improvement. I conducted formal interviews with a dozen staff members, from housekeepers to senior management, asking about their experiences, their concerns, their hopes for the property's future. The picture that emerged was complex, but consistent. Employees had been demoralized by the budget cuts, frustrated by the pressure to do more with less, afraid to speak up about declining standards for fear of losing their jobs. Vanessa Thornton had been a symptom, not a cause. She'd started her career at the Meridian Grand as an enthusiastic young professional committed to guest satisfaction, but years of watching standards slip and complaints go unaddressed had calcified her idealism into cynicism. I'm not excusing what she did. The way she treated me was inexcusable, a profound failure of basic human decency that deserved consequences. But I'm also honest enough to recognize that she didn't develop that behavior in a vacuum. The organization had created conditions where dismissing guest complaints became normal, where judging people by their appearance became acceptable, where cynicism replaced service as the dominant workplace culture. Changing that would require more than firing one employee. It would require transforming the entire operation from the top down. On my final morning at the property, Michael Brennan met me in the lobby to say goodbye. He looked exhausted, but determined. The kind of fatigue that comes not from despair, but from intense effort. The ownership group has approved everything, he said. Full restoration of the maintenance budget, 30% increase in housekeeping staff, complete overhaul of our training programs, and they've given me full authority to implement whatever changes I deem necessary, with quarterly reviews to track progress. I nodded, genuinely pleased. That's a good start. What about Ms. Thornton? His expression flickered with something I couldn't quite read, sadness perhaps, or regret. She's gone. Terminated with cause, no severance beyond what was legally required. He paused, seeming to wrestle with himself. She called me yesterday, asked if there was any way to appeal, any chance to make things right. What did you tell her? I asked. That some mistakes can't be undone, that she'd have to build a new career somewhere else, hopefully with more self-awareness than she showed here. But I also told her something else. I told her that what happened to her could have happened to any of us, that we all have moments where we forget why we chose this profession, where we let exhaustion or frustration turn us into people we wouldn't recognize, that the only difference between her and the rest of us is that her moment happened in front of the wrong person. It was a gracious perspective, more generous than I might have been in his position. But it also reflected the kind of leadership that had made the Meridian Grand exceptional in the first place, a willingness to see employees as whole people rather than interchangeable units of productivity. I wrote my review on the flight back to New York, 8,000 words that took me 3 days to edit into something I could stand behind. It was the most difficult piece I'd ever written, balancing honesty about what I'd experienced with recognition of the genuine efforts being made to address those failures. The headline read, "The Rise, Fall, and Possible Redemption of the Meridian Grand." I detailed everything, the maintenance issues, the housekeeping violations, the encounter with Vanessa Thornton, the response from management and ownership. I didn't soften the failures, but I also didn't ignore the commitment to improvement. The final rating was 3 stars out of 5, down from the 5 stars I'd given 3 years earlier. In the concluding paragraph, I wrote something I'd never written before, a conditional recommendation. The Meridian Grand failed me during my recent visit in ways that are difficult to forgive, but what happened afterward gives me hope. The people now responsible for this property seem to understand what went wrong and why, and they're taking meaningful steps to address it. I'll be back in 1 year to reassess. If they've delivered on their promises, they'll have a chance to earn back the rating they lost. If they haven't, this review will look generous in comparison. The article published in our March issue, and the response was immediate. Within a week, the Meridian Grand had been featured in coverage from hospitality trade publications to mainstream news outlets, all focusing on the same story. The resort that had been saved by a critic's review, then nearly destroyed by its own success, and was now fighting to reclaim its reputation. Vanessa Thornton became an unwilling symbol of everything wrong with modern hospitality, her video clips shared and reshared across social media, analyzed by service industry consultants, used as a training example of what not to do. I felt conflicted about this. She'd behaved badly, yes, but she was also a human being whose worst moment had been captured on camera and broadcast to millions. The internet's appetite for public humiliation disturbed me, even when the subject had arguably earned it. 6 months later, I received an email that I didn't expect. It was from Vanessa. I almost deleted it unread, assuming it would be angry or accusatory or pleading. Instead, it was something else entirely. "Mr. Reeves," she wrote, "I'm not writing to apologize or to ask for anything. I just wanted you to know what happened after. I lost my job, obviously. I also lost my relationship, my apartment, my sense of myself as a good person. For 3 months, I couldn't leave my house. I watched the video of myself over and over, trying to understand how I became someone who could laugh at a stranger's legitimate complaint. I didn't recognize the woman on that screen. She was cruel and dismissive and petty, and I'd somehow become her without noticing. I'm working at a small bed and breakfast now, in a town where no one knows who I am or what I did. The owners are a retired couple who don't care about my past, only about whether I treat their guests well. Every day, I try to be the opposite of who I was in that lobby. Every day, I fail a little less. I'm not asking for forgiveness. What I did was unforgivable. But I wanted you to know that your review, as painful as it was to read, told the truth. Not just about the resort, but about me. I needed to see that truth to have any chance of changing. So thank you, I suppose, for being honest when it would have been easier to accept the settlement and move on, for holding me accountable when everyone else in my life had given up trying. I read that email 3 times, then closed my laptop and sat in silence for a long while. This job has taught me many things about human nature, about how people behave when they think no one important is watching, about the gap between who we believe ourselves to be and who we actually are. But Vanessa's email taught me something new, that accountability, painful as it is, can sometimes be a gift. The person who laughed at me in that lobby deserved to lose her job, but the person who wrote that email deserved a second chance. I hope she finds one. 1 year later, exactly as promised, I returned to the Meridian Grand for a follow-up assessment. The transformation was remarkable. The property had been renovated from top to bottom, not the superficial cosmetic work that private equity firms usually favor, but genuine structural improvements that addressed root causes rather than symptoms. Staff morale had improved dramatically, supported by competitive wages, comprehensive training, and a management culture that valued their input. Most importantly, the service had returned to the level I remembered from my first visit, attentive and professional and genuinely caring, the kind of experience that justifies a premium price point. Michael Brennan met me in the lobby on my final morning, just as he had the year before. But this time, he was smiling. "So," he asked, "what's the verdict?" I'd already written the review in my head, 4.5 stars. The only reason it wasn't 5 was that I needed to see sustained excellence over multiple visits before restoring that rating. But they were on track. They'd done what they promised. They'd earned their redemption. Howard Blackwell had become the property's primary advocate within the ownership group, channeling his guilt over the initial failures into fierce protection of the resources needed for genuine improvement. The private equity firm had discovered something surprising. A well-run luxury resort could be more profitable than a stripped-down cost center, because guests who had exceptional experiences came back year after year and told their friends. Douglas Fairbanks had retired, pushed out by limited partners who'd lost confidence in his judgment after the Meridian Grand debacle became public. Amanda Rothschild had left for a competitor. The firm's hospitality portfolio was now led by Howard, whose philosophy had shifted dramatically from his days of pushing budget cuts. As I walked through the lobby for the last time, I passed the concierge desk where Vanessa Thornton had once stood. A young man sat there now, earnest and eager, greeting every guest with genuine warmth, regardless of how they were dressed. "Welcome to the Meridian Grand," he said to an elderly couple shuffling through the entrance in matching tracksuits. "How can I make your stay exceptional?" It was a small moment, the kind that happens thousands of times a day at hotels around the world, noticed by almost no one. But I noticed. I noticed because it represented everything a hospitality professional should be: present, attentive, treating every guest as if they were the most important person in the building. I thought about Vanessa, wherever she was now, learning to be that person again at her small bed and breakfast. I thought about Michael, fighting to rebuild what had been nearly destroyed. I thought about Howard, transforming his guilt into positive action. I thought about every employee and every guest and every small interaction that collectively determined whether a property would succeed or fail. And I thought about my role in all of it, the critic who could build reputations or destroy them with a few thousand carefully chosen words. It's a responsibility I don't take lightly. My review published in the following month's issue. The Meridian Grand's bookings increased by 60% within the quarter. The property went on to win several industry awards and became a case study in successful turnaround management. Sometimes, people ask me if I feel guilty about what happened to Vanessa Thornton. They ask if I think the consequences were proportional to her offense, if destroying someone's career over a single incident of poor judgment was fair. My answer is always the same. I didn't destroy her career. She destroyed it herself, one dismissive comment at a time, one laugh at one guest's expense. I just happened to be the guest who documented it. But I also think about grace, about second chances, about the possibility that our worst moments don't have to define us forever. Vanessa is still out there somewhere, hopefully still trying to be better, hopefully still failing a little less each day. And the Meridian Grand is still out there too, hopefully maintaining the standards that earned them back their reputation. I'll be watching. That's my job. 30 minutes was all it took. 30 minutes from the moment Vanessa laughed at me to the moment Michael Brennan rushed into the lobby and her world collapsed. 30 minutes to transform a career built over 6 years into a cautionary tale shared by millions. 30 minutes to remind everyone watching that you never know who's on the other side of that desk, that courtesy isn't optional, that the person you dismiss might be the person who decides your future. She thought I was nobody. She was wrong. And that was the moment she realized she'd just destroyed her entire career. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.